every company has valuable data. Even companies who think, there's nothing valuable that we have. Guess what? That data is important to you. And hackers know that, because in this day and age, if you lose access to your data, most organizations can't fulfill their mission. So even if that data isn't necessarily sensitive or it isn't worth anything in the underground market, it's worth something to you. And hackers know that your data is important to you. So we need business owners, we need executives to understand that this is a risk. Just like operational risk, personnel risk, financial risk, cyber risk needs to be in the discussion, and ownership, executives, key decision makers need to be talking about it. This is no longer Keith and IT deals with it. We're past that.
Welcome to Canada Now. I'm Ashley Smith, and every week we dig into the bold ideas, real stories, and fresh perspectives shaping Canada's future. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Canada Now, the show where we explore the ideas, people, and forces shaping Canada's next chapter. I'm your host, Ashley Smith. Today, we're digging into a topic that affects every Canadian leader, every organization, and frankly, every single one of us: cybersecurity. A space where the stakes are rising, the threats are evolving, and the pressure on leaders to get this right has never been higher. And we're doing it with someone who has spent nearly 20 years on the front lines of helping organizations strengthen both their security posture and their leadership culture. Dominic Vogel is the founder and president of Vogel Cyber Leadership and Coaching, and a trusted advisor to organizations across Canada and the US, helping boards, executives, nonprofits, and companies of every size navigate a threat landscape that is changing faster than most leaders can keep up with. Dominic blends deep technical expertise with a rare ability to communicate clearly and practically, helping organizations move from fear-based thinking to confident, proactive action. His work sits at the intersection of cybersecurity, risk, and leadership, equipping teams to make smarter decisions in a world where digital threats are no longer an IT issue, but a business-wide reality. So today, we're going to look at where cyber risk and strategic oversight are heading as we approach 2026, what Canadian leaders are getting wrong and right, and how organizations can build resilience before the next big wave of disruption hits. Welcome, Dominic. Thank you so much for being here on Canada Now with me.
Ashley, thank you so much for having me on your show, my friend. I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, and by the way, for our listeners, I'm probably going to refer to Dominic as Dom moving forward.
It's less awkward that way.
It's less awkward, but we get the Google name in there, right?
There you go. SEO.
Yeah. So, Dom, you've been in this space for a long time, and things I'm sure have been changing every year. But it seems as though the last year, this issue has become more top of mind. And I will say that as I was prepping for this show, I thought, okay, cybersecurity can be a bit of a dry issue. But the more I looked at it, I'm like, we actually probably need a good 3 hours to go through some of these things because there's so much to unpack. So why don't you tell me a little bit about maybe your background, and let's get started at what you're looking at today, and then we'll dive in a bit deeper.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, to talk more about my origin story. So like you mentioned, I've been in cyber for 20 years. The first 10 years of my career, I was very corporate focused before corporate broke me, or I broke corporate. I always forget which one. But I was in charge of cybersecurity at a large credit union here in Vancouver. And I decided to become an entrepreneur and focus more on helping small and mid-sized organizations because I felt there was a pressing need for that. And 10 years later, celebrating 10 years as an entrepreneur, I still recognize that small and mid-sized organizations are the ones that need the most help, right? I mean, that's where the majority of companies are. The majority of businesses in this country are small and mid-sized organizations. So I love being able to help them and focus very pragmatically on what cyber risk means there. And it's not necessarily about buying more tech or having to spend a ton of money. I think it's about looking at it as a risk and less as a tech issue that you get your IT guy to deal with. So that's my background. I mean, for people who really are interested, they can look me up on LinkedIn or a quick Google search. I'm very vain, so there's lots of items about me out there. Yeah, so that's about me from a high level. But maybe to answer part two of that, the thing that I think is most pressing right now and what's changed is that we need business owners, we need executives, particularly among small and mid-sized organizations, to recognize that we're no longer in 1995. Hell, it's not even 2010 anymore from a cyber risk perspective. Small and mid-sized organizations, for the longest time, they didn't need to worry about hackers or being hacked or protecting their data. Why? The majority of cyber attacks are focused on the big companies. But in the past few years, because of the pandemic and more companies undergoing digital transformation, coming online, right? We're in an AI era right now. Guess what? Every company has valuable data. Even companies who think, there's nothing valuable that we have. Hackers don't need it. Guess what? That data is important to you, right? And hackers know that because in this day and age, if you lose access to your data, most organizations can't fulfill their mission, right? They all rely on computers. They all rely on data. Very few of us rely on pen and paper anymore. And so even if that data isn't necessarily sensitive or isn't worth anything in the underground market, it's worth something to you. And hackers know that. So if they kibosh access to your key systems or key data for 3 hours, 4 hours a day, they know at some point you're going to scream uncle and be like, okay, we'll pay. What was it that you wanted? We'll pay that because we're losing money right now. Mm-hmm. So attackers know that your data is important to you. So we need business owners, we need executives to understand that this is a risk. Just like operational risk, personnel risk, financial risk, cyber risk needs to be in the discussion. Ownership, executives, key decision makers need to be talking about it. This is no longer Keith and IT deals with it. We're past that.
And so for folks who are listening, I'm curious if we can be as honest as possible. Where do you see the landscape in terms of these let's talk small, medium-sized businesses in Canada through your experience? So just anecdotally, would you say that most organizations are not thinking about this in the right way? Are they thinking that this is something they need to prioritize? I mean, my assumption is as AI becomes more sophisticated and the capacity for organized crime professionals to hack becomes stronger because their toolkit is better, that in 2025, companies would be prioritizing their cybersecurity framework.
You know what? It's, again, some sectors more so than others. And I think it generally comes down to from a regulatory perspective or if their customers are demanding that they're doing that. But for most organizations, they're not. And what I'm seeing across the Canadian small and mid-sized market, and even in the States as well, that it's highly reactive, right? Unless there's a very key reason why you're needing to invest in cyber, they're not. And I sort of boiled those down, distilled that down into a couple of key reasons. So one is cyber insurance, right? 10 years ago or 15 years ago when cyber insurance first came out, it was like ecstasy at a rave. Given ecstasy at a rave party. I was getting my metaphors screwed up there. Everyone just got it, right? Or Oprah. Hey, you get cyber insurance. You get cyber insurance. Everyone's getting cyber insurance. They weren't doing anything in terms of are you doing something to deserve that cyber insurance? 15 years later, insurers aren't stupid, right? They are saying, okay, we're paying out too much. We need to start pulling back. More and more companies are like, oh, we're being denied our cyber insurance. Or even worse, they think they have cyber insurance and they go for the claim. They're like, no, you're on the hook. City of Hamilton as an example, they had a massive data breach there, huge cyber attack issue and with ransomware. And their cyber insurer ultimately said, no, you weren't doing this particular requirement here. We're denying it. Mm-hmm. $20 million they're on the hook for. $20 million the City of Hamilton is on the hook for, right? And that's just a small example. That's happening time and time again throughout the Canadian small and mid-sized business landscape. So cyber insurance and companies losing it, they're like, no, we need to have it. That's our safety blanket. So that is one of the reasons I'm seeing organizations invest in cyber or prioritizing it. Second one is they just had a data breach, they just had ransomware, what have you. It's sort of like that friend who has a heart attack. That friend's going to have a heart attack, bad lifestyle, what have you. And then either they have that awakening and they change, or they change for a short period of time and then they go back to their old ways. But you never let a good crisis go to waste. And I see a lot of organizations in the aftermath of that pain, they're like, yeah, we need to build back stronger. We're not letting that happen again. So it's a second reason. The third reason is primarily with B2B organizations and primarily those that are selling into a larger ecosystem. So trying to sell it to, let's say, Fortune 1000 companies or Fortune 2000 companies. And what we're seeing is the global supply chain risk management and bigger companies are clamping down on supply chain risk and vendor risk management. And so they're wanting to make sure that the vendors that they rely on are fulfilling certain security requirements, right? And didn't used to do that before, or not to the level of how stringent they are now. And I'll illustrate that with a quick example. I had a Thai food company reach out to me, and they're like, yeah, we have like this $5 million deal with Walmart. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of Thai food. But then it was like, okay, well, what's the problem? He said, well, Walmart is clamping down. They said, unless we show them proof of these security things that we said we've been doing, but haven't been, wink, wink. And I was like, okay, well, you gave me an anchor point. So you're saying that you have a $5 million contract. So when I say that we're going to invest, $200K in improving your security, and a good chunk of that's going to be what you're going to pay me, that's going to sound like a really good deal, right? $200K to protect the $5 million line of revenue. They're like, yep, let's do it. So again, in all these instances, it's very reactive, but it's very critical and very clear in that they're not doing it proactively. One of the things that I've seen over the past few years is that cyber, as it is, I think with a lot of maybe human nature, we're not proactive until it's too late. And we're very much past the window of too late, right? So there's a lot of reactive spend around cyber.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of spend, I have to wonder, with the sort of economic landscape and perhaps uncertainty around where the world is going, and even with tariffs and how companies are trying to navigate these waters in terms of their business, especially small, medium business.
Yep.
How has that impacted the way that they're looking at cyber risk and cyber security as an investment piece?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's affected it greatly. I mean, and I've witnessed that. I mean, I have a lot of manufacturing clients that I provide fractional chief security officer services to, and this past year they all pulled back on cyber, right? And why? Because of tariffs. There was too much uncertainty, and they were cutting everything. And then when I went through the talk with them, I said, look, just because this is happening, cyber is still a present risk. They're like, yeah, but faced with an existential risk, the tariff one poses a greater threat to us. So we're throwing everything we have, including the kitchen sink, at that one. And it's unfortunate because, again, cyber attackers recognize what's going on in that ecosystem. They know these manufacturing companies are now all of a sudden deprioritizing cyber. Guess where they're focusing more efforts on? Manufacturing sector, right? It's almost this chicken and egg, cat and mouse type problem where it's a circular, the cat chasing its tail kind of thing. So I think it's super important for business owners to recognize that we can't completely eliminate that cyber risk, but you need to prioritize it. You need to have discussions. And it's no longer, like I said, an issue around tech. Even simple discussions. And this is where, like I said, for me, it's just having simple discussions such as, how long could we tolerate downtime? So if we lost access to key data, key systems, how long could we last? Most small and mid-sized organizations don't have an answer to that. Or if I was to ask their key executives, I would get different answers. Starting there, prioritizing discussions around that, prioritizing security spend around the systems and the data that support your critical processes. Do that, right? Far too many organizations do cyber as this big encompassing blanket. We're going to just cyber up everything. That's not effective. That's not efficient, right? If you're protecting your Miley Cyrus MP3s to the same extent that you're protecting your critical data, you're doing security wrong. Nothing against Miley, but it's just from an efficiency and effectiveness perspective. But that's where a lot of organizations are missing the boat there. So again, you don't need to be all in or all out, right? But you need to at least recognize what's most important. So starting with that simple question, I think is a question that most small and mid-sized organizations should be asking themselves.
Yeah, and that really sounds like what you're talking about here is sort of leadership, culture, and governance.
Yeah.
We've discussed now a bit about investment from a financial perspective, and predominantly, as an example, on insurance and other systems. But sitting around a board table and knowing what these, what your risk appetite is, and having that answer in alignment across an organization, that's a time investment. And it does seem, and I wonder, if organizations are saying, you know what, we don't have the financial capacity to lean in on this. We're just putting our head in the sand. It seems like at least these conversations should be had. There should at least be some sort of like plan around what you would do.
Absolutely. And I think that's an interesting, where we're seeing an interesting shift. And what I'm telling board directors, executives, you can no longer use the line of plausible deniability. Oh, we didn't know, right? That is no longer legal defense, right? And we're seeing that in the States and in Canada as well. Companies are getting hacked, and employee data or customer data is affected. Lawsuits are happening, right? And those are setting legal precedents. And like I said, we didn't know, that doesn't hold up in the law of court anymore, right? It certainly doesn't hold up in the court of public opinion. So now we're sort of moving to a spot that I refer to as plausible auditability, where we're like, yeah, we did this, this, and this. It still happened, right? All right, that's different than saying, plugging your ears and saying, la, 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 la. No, you at least have done what you could. And at the end of the day, you can't eliminate that risk, right? You need to at least demonstrate that you've taken steps that are prudent and appropriate given your company size, sector, right? The data that you're talking about, that becomes then more of a legally defensible approach to cyber, right? But if you're not able to produce records or levels of governance, or that you've been asking certain questions, that again puts you all on the hook from a legal perspective. And especially, like I said, with organizations where there's a board of directors and executives, they're the ones on the hook, right? And I think, especially for smaller organizations, we're past the date of just trying to, we're going to fire the IT guy, right? He's the scapegoat, right? Well, we're going to just sacrifice him. Can't do that anymore, right? That's, like I said, with each passing lawsuit after a big data breach, these legal precedents are becoming firmer and firmer and more clear that executives or directors for small and mid-sized organizations, they need to do more.
I am taking a governance program right now, more geared towards scale up and tech companies in Canada. And, cyber risk is something that I've explored from an organizational board level before, but as I'm diving in, it's scary. I think that you are putting yourself on the line, your liability, as a board member. And so I'm wondering, maybe we can unpack a little bit more about what it is that you're doing in your practice, because you're going in and you're helping different types of leadership teams, you're coaching. Can you give us an outline of your services? Because I think it will help organizations understand maybe what they're not doing.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'll say my foundational service is my Fractional Chief Information Security Officer service. So that's essentially, I'm overseeing the risk management function of cyber risk in an organization. So that's building it out from the ground up for most organizations. So that involves things such as, like I said, the technical level, hiring a security team, bringing them in, coaching them, making sure that we have the right tools in place. With those tools, do we have the right policies and processes in place? Then moving up the chain, do we have the right governance in place? Do we have executives and board directors, if there are board directors, asking the right questions, right? Building out that whole, like a better term, governance infrastructure in terms of making sure that this is managed as a risk in the organization and not just, like I said, an IT issue that gets shoved off the side of someone's desk. So building that up from the ground up is what I do. And I stay with organizations for as long as it makes sense. For most small, mid-sized organizations, it doesn't make sense for them to have a full-time version of me. So the fractional model, and we've seen the fractional model explode over the past decade in all sorts of other areas, right? Fractional CMOs, CROs, what have you. The cyber one is no different, right? So that model is meant to serve small and mid-sized organizations. And I have clients for across North America in helping them. On my coaching side, I work more with security leaders and generally enterprise organizations. So in-house versions of me, but people who struggle with, I'll say, the communication. How do they take what unfortunately is often seen as a very technical subject matter, and how do they convey that in a way that's going to resonate with the board, with their executives, with their bosses? How are they going to make sure that their team focuses on these things beyond just from a technical perspective, right? So I work with organizations and in-house cyber teams to truly, for lack of a better term, humanize it and modernize it in a way that it's going to be treated as a risk. So those are the two areas that I like focusing on.
I wasn't going to lean too much into that topic today because I'm hoping we can chat another day about fractional work. But I think it is an interesting point. And, it seems that organizations now are kind of, we're entering a world where organizations are becoming, they're falling into categories they never wanted to fall into. So like many organizations have a tech component, even if they're not a tech company. And so to your point, they have data stored, they need to manage that, et cetera. And so it just may not have been the thing that they were really thinking about, might not have been where they brought in their talent. And small companies too, not just mom and pop shops that have been around, but emerging companies that are looking to scale. They need to figure out how to prioritize bringing in talent, bringing in senior people. And so we have touched on this a little bit in pieces throughout the show, but can you unpack a little bit more for our audience if this is a new idea for them? Like, just what is a fractional senior person look like? And maybe give an idea. You don't have to break down compensation, for example, but maybe what in a weekly function, like what does that look like in terms of time commitment and what you can expect from somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ashley. To me, the whole notion of fractional is that you're able to tap into immense value at a fraction of the cost, and you're able to hit the ground running. If you bring in someone in-house, the cost is going to be much higher, right? You have salary, you have benefits, what have you. And then you have to get that person accustomed to culture, in politics, what have you. When you're fractional, you're brought in and focused much more so on outcomes, right? One of the things that I do, and I'm a big believer from a fractional perspective, is that it can be very much value-based and outcome-based. So I don't need to worry about people's feelings or what have you. It's that you brought me in to do X, Y, Z, we're going to do X, Y, Z, right? And what that looks like, again, from a weekly or monthly perspective, I'll say that, again, it depends on the client, because smaller clients, for example, one of my smallest clients are a 20-person organization. So the amount of time I spend with them from a fractional perspective is different than one of my larger clients. One of my larger clients is around 2,000 employees, right? So they have a much more inner complexities, so I spend more time with them. That's obviously reflected in different costs as well. But at the end of the day, it's about understanding at the onset, what's our goal for the year? To me, and the way I engage, and I think it's different from everyone, but who does fractional. But for me, I do fractional for at least a year at a time. I say, okay, what's our goal for the year? What are the outcomes that you want to see from here? If you don't know what those outcomes are, I'll tell you what outcomes I think we should achieve, and here's why. Then we have that commitment to that, and then we focus on getting that done, right? So to me, again, it's being able to tap into instant value, instant capabilities, able to hit the ground running, and at least, like I said, with great fractional people, at least one of the things I like to bring to the table too is that if it's something that I'm not sure what to do, I tap into my vast network. Right? That's the whole point too of fractional, is that someone in-house isn't like, okay, this is all on me, it's all on my shoulders. No, you're paying for me, you're paying for my expertise that's been hard earned over 21 years and network that I have. So if I don't know the answer to that problem, I'm going to get the damn answer to that. Right? I'm not going to try and BS you and be like, oh yeah, no, this is what we should do. I have no reason to BS you, right? My goal is to find you that answer, right? So that to me is what great fractional executives or fractional services should strive to do.
That's wonderful. And by the way, I will comment that it's funny to hear you say, you're internal, you're part of an organization, but it's not about people's feelings. You're probably like the kindest person I've ever met. If you check out Dom's LinkedIn, you will see what I mean. So your version of not having to worry about those things is probably still a pretty
I'm still kind.
Oh, that's funny. Sorry, I just had to bring that up. I'm just wondering, are you seeing anything related to how geopolitical shifts are impacting how Canadians maybe should be thinking about cyber?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day too, in certain sectors are more prone to, I'll say, geopolitical shifts. So manufacturing, as an example, right? Especially when you're dealing with intellectual property, things that are very unique. I generally see more Chinese state-based activity there compared to maybe financial services. Right? Financial services, they usually don't see a lot of stuff from Chinese back stuff. Maybe it's from the Russians. Maybe it's from other people who are trying to introduce instability into the Canadian financial ecosystem. So depending on the sector, absolutely, right? But over the course of 21 years, not a lot has changed. I mean, for much of my career, it's been the The Iranians, North Koreans, Russians, and Chinese, and well, here we are 21 years later, and it's still them, right? Only thing that's changing is that, again, they're becoming that much more stealthy. They're becoming that much more sophisticated. They're focusing that much more on a broader spectrum. It's not just the big companies, it's every company. Even the smallest startup that you may think is consequential, if you have intellectual property, the Chinese government probably wants it, right? So the volume and the veracity of attacks, and we're seeing this because of AI as well, the sheer quantity is at levels that I've never seen either, right? And again, that's going to be interesting to what tipping point do we get there? Because right now, a lot of the reasons why we don't have greater emphasis from a policing perspective is that we're still at this, I'll say, acceptable risk level where it's up to businesses to protect themselves. And attackers know that. These global cybercrime groups know that if they commit too many crimes, then there's going to be too much of a focus on them, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how on the bad guy side of things, how many attacks they keep pumping out. But like I said, because of AI, they're able to pump out quantities that we've never seen in years past.
Tell me a little bit about the small to medium business. Let's think about the mom and pop type of shop and where succession might be, in the horizon. Have you had much experience with and just because I'm trying to bring it down to the everyday Canadian who might have a small business or even, let's say, the next generation who might be thinking of taking on, acquiring or taking over their parents' small business. Like, what sort of lens should they have as they're likely thinking about a lot of other things at the same time and how to make sure they're set up for success?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've seen out a lot of, I'll say, family dynamics with family-run organizations or family-run companies where younger up-and-coming generation that was in a position to try and take leadership, long-term leadership, is still butting heads with their parents in terms of things like cyber. A very clear example I always point back to is a manufacturing company where the COO was the son, and he was in a position where he was essentially running the show. His dad was, as he referred to it, on the way out kind of thing. And he said, "Yeah, we need to modernize how we do cyber here." He said, "I'm worried about it. We've done nothing. My dad just relied on the same IT guy for 35 years." Right? He said, "Well, I need to look at this from a bigger picture perspective." And I was like, "Great. Here's what I'll do." Same spiel. And he's like, "This is great. Awesome." And then 2 days later, he called and he said, "Yeah, we're not moving ahead." And I said, "Well, you seemed pretty damn confident when we spoke earlier." Right? So what changed? He said, "Well, my dad." I said, "Look, I don't get it." I said, "I thought you were the COO. You tell me you don't have," and it wasn't asking for a ton of money. I said, "I think we were talking about 75K. I said, "You don't have a COO, the authority for 75K. I mean, your company's, you told me like you're a $50 million company." So yeah, no, my dad thinks that cyber is a scam. I was like, "Can I talk with your dad?" Right. And so I went to their office and sat down. Have you ever tried to convince old, bitter, prejudiced white man to change his convictions? Yeah, I have a pretty low track record in changing their opinion. But he was pretty much like, "No, I think what you do is a scam." I was like, "Wow, I'm so glad I drove for an hour and a half here to have that conversation. Thank you so much. Have a great retirement." And a year and a half later, the son called me and he said, "Yeah, Dad retired. We just had this massive data breach. I could really use your help." I was like, "Look, I'll help you, but that number I put that we said, I'm doubling that, because when there's blood on the ground, it's a messier cleanup, right? It would have been cheaper to deal it." But they say, "Yeah, I know, it's fine, right?" So yeah, you just send the difference to your dad. Maybe he'll pay the difference. But it goes to show you, though, they're and categorically younger demographics with family-run organizations see the need to modernize IT and modernize how they're doing data and managing that data and securing that data and all that. But I'm still seeing a lot of old guard that's seeing it as I don't believe that, or we've never been hacked. Why would we need that? Right? Myths that are pervasive still. And like I said, because of those family dynamics, they're at a deadlock. And here it was. So that company ended up having a ransomware situation, and they ended up having downtime for almost a week. And the son told me, they said if they had been down for another 3 days, they would have shut down. This was like an 80-year-old company. I was like, that's really sad. You came within 3 days, like your dad's legacy, all that gone, because again, your dad didn't think that this was real, right? So that's my call to action to anyone who's listening, is that this is real, right? This is not a scam. This is real. This is the world that we live in, right? It's not just physical risks that we deal with, right? We deal with digital risks. And with every organization, big or small, even if you're a one-person company, right, you need to take this seriously. You need to take steps. Does it mean you need to spend millions of dollars? No, but it means you need to start asking the right questions around what is important to my business. What is it that I can't live without? What is it that if I lose access to it for an hour, a day, whatever it is, that my business goes out? You build your security strategy and your security investment around those numbers.
What you're also pointing out, you're talking about legacy, reputational risk, and not just with customers,
Absolutely.
but even if
Your staff, your employees.
yeah, exactly, and perhaps the supply chain that you're a part of.
Yep.
It's something that hopefully folks are taking more seriously. I think in certain circles, folks are recognizing this, and it's just the next step of how to put the right things in place. I think people have come to realize that hackers are not necessarily someone in a hoodie in a basement.
No,
that
those days are gone.
far more sophisticated. If you are really trying to think about your strategy, if you're a solopreneur, like what are some key things someone could do today to just make sure they're setting themselves up to reduce their risk?
I love that question, Ashley, because again, at the end of the day, good security needs to be actionable, needs to be pragmatic. So for just any organization, from a one-person organization to anyone in the small business arena that hasn't thought about it, first thing is any remote access. So that means if you're not in the office and you're remoting into some internal computer, internal server, that needs to be under what's called multi-factor authentication. You can no longer rely on username and password. You have to assume that those are broken, that those are compromised. And you need to leverage a what's called an authenticator app, not just SMS-based. SMS-based too is unfortunately broken. So Microsoft has a free authenticator app. Google has a free authenticator app. These are things that your IT team or IT service provider can absolutely set up. That is something that it's table stakes, right? You need to do that. If you're not doing it, your system's already compromised. Any email access. So a lot of people use MS365 for Google or whatever. I mean, those tend to be the most common ones. Same thing. Username, password, multi-factor authentication. Leverage an authenticator app. It's free, or it's included in whatever you're paying from a business licensing perspective. Do that. Right. Those are the two most commonly compromised, what are called attack vectors. So basically, ways into an organization. Lock those down. Well. You already reduce your risk drastically. Right. Think about it as almost like a digital door. Right. Right now, cyber criminals they're going along trying all these digital doors. And if you just have some basic level of locks in place, they move on because there's no shortage of companies that don't have the basics. It's sort of the analogy like a criminal who goes into a car parking lot, right? They're going to jiggle the door handles, right? If you just have your door locked, you're less likely to be compromised. But the ones who didn't even bother locking the doors and left the valuables in the front seat, well, yeah, you're asking for it, right? So we're very much in that model right now. So those ones for sure. The second thing is, and we mentioned it earlier, what is the most critical data, right? What business processes make your business tick? What makes your business money, right? Or what fulfills your business's purpose, right? Know what those business processes are, map that then to what data feeds those processes. Once you know what data feeds those processes, what systems or system stores that data. Once you know that, identify that, work with your IT team, with your IT service provider, bring in someone like myself to say, okay, this is what we need to secure. Focus on that, build security around that. Just doing those two things there, you're in terrific shape. This doesn't need to be rocket science. It's about doing the basics and doing them well.
How do you think about keeping organizations and teams, including call it entry-level employees, sort of up to date and in touch with sort of the culture of an organization, their best practices? And I'm thinking about phishing and those sorts of things that are getting far more sophisticated, and social engineering and those sorts of things. How are you thinking about those areas, especially as AI is emerging and, people can mimic and pretend to be other people so easily now. And I'm sure it'll become far harder to distinguish between what's real and what's not. And then how to make sure that your frontline people are thinking about these issues as much as they, humanly can to avoid mistakes.
Yeah, it's an area of, I'll say, intense debate, and one that I have conflicting feelings on, because part of the problem is that we should not be creating fragile systems that can be brought down by someone clicking on one wrong thing or one person in accounts payable giving up their password. We create really crappy systems, right? We create very unresilient systems, right? We need to focus in terms, I think is often referred to as anti-fragile systems. We need to focus more on creating those types of systems. Is that going to happen anytime soon? No. So there's that sort of bigger macro picture that, we need to focus on doing that, because that is the long-term solution in terms of how we're going to deal with the volume and veracity that AI is going to introduce from a threat perspective, right? We need to focus more on that. In the short term, what do we do in terms of instilling an empowered culture around security? Security awareness is something I'm not a huge fan of, because most organizations treat that as a compliance exercise. And most organizations treat it as a way that they can say, yeah, we did that for the year so we can get our cyber insurance. If that's your goal, great, right? Then that's fine. But studies have shown, and the security awareness has been around for probably about 20 years now, it actually doesn't do anything in terms of changing behavior or leading to more positive security outcomes more frequently. Studies have shown it actually is ineffective. So that's not great. But we keep spending lots of money on these security awareness tools and what have you. It's become, like I said, a very compliance-driven initiative, not necessarily achieving proper outcomes. So how do you reduce the fragility of if someone clicks on something that they shouldn't? To me, at the end, it goes back to what can we do to reduce the impact if someone does something. So that means, in high-level terms, that people only have access to what they need, right? Someone in HR should not have access to critical financial files, and people in finance should not have access to critical HR files, as an example. That's one spot to start. Another spot to start is that we need to be able to limit the impact. If someone's computer gets infected, we need to be able to isolate that very quickly so it doesn't start going through the network, right? We need to have greater ability to observe what's happening in an IT network at any given time, right? And be able to react based on what we're observing, not after the fact. Oh, look, 10 months ago, we got breached. Oh, maybe we should do something about that, right? It's very reactive, right? We need stuff that's happening more so in real time. And then in terms of that culture, building processes around that. So a very simple example I'll give is with something called a wire transfer fraud, where email comes into someone accounts payable. It's coming from the CFO. Oh, we just got this new vendor or this existing vendor. They just emailed me while I was on vacation. Here's the new financial information. Send it there, right? And make sure you send them a payment for $300,000. I see that with so many small businesses. They're like, oh yeah, we just sent out $10K or $50K to someone, and we thought it was from the CFO, but it wasn't. The fix there isn't greater awareness, and the fix there isn't greater technology. The fix there is a simple procedural maturity. What amount do we need to get an additional level of approval, right? So I always go into organizations and say, okay, wire transfers, anything over 5K, it requires you to physically contact that person through another lines of communication. So if a request came in through email, you phone them. If they came in through email, you send a carrier pigeon, whatever, something that you're doing a different level of communication, right? Very simple procedural fix, and that essentially eliminates the risk of wire transfer fraud, right? So it's not just about getting people informed, and again, informing them and saying, here's what scams we're seeing right now is absolutely important of a bigger picture. But too many organizations are just relying on sending out that, here's your security awareness training for the year, watch the 20-minute video and answer all the questions. You can't just rely on that. That is just a small part of the overall puzzle.
I'm wondering for folks who maybe are a bit constricted with budget, but they want to take the steps they should be taking. Is it valuable to reach out and find advisory type services at the very least, like to help people get sort of things set up? So once they have the financial capacity to lean in and do a bit more, like what are you seeing as best practices for folks who have good intentions and just practically can't make it work bringing in a fractional
Sure.
person, for example.
I get that. And that's why, like I said, I mean, just starting off with those practical, actionable steps and, those three that I mentioned are spots that they can start, right? Multi-factor authentication on their email and remote access, understanding their critical business processes and where that data and where those systems live, and just see what they can do with their existing spend to further lock that down, and look for procedural maturity. Are there opportunities where we can further enhance our security by just putting in processes, right? An example, the wire transfer fraud there. That doesn't cost anything, right? So there's so much opportunity to improve security through just the people and process and overall risk management perspective or governance perspective. We haven't even talked about tech, right? Like the MFA stuff, the multi-factor authentication, they're already paying for that. You're just not using it. Unfortunately, places like Microsoft and Google, they do not instill that by default. You have to opt into that, right? But you're already paying for it.
Is there any other tech, speaking of which, that you're seeing kind of coming around the corner that is getting you excited as somebody that's deeply ingrained in this, that you find maybe, can AI help fight AI?
It's fine. So like, having been at this for 21 years, I've seen the technology evolve at a phenomenal rate. But 21 years later, we're still struggling with the exact same problems, right? So I'm the least tech guy that you'll find. I don't believe tech is the solution. But the problem is that we've created an ecosystem where like, yeah, buy this tool, buy this tool, buy this tool. The security ecosystem is so confusing. There's so many security companies, startups out there, and all just trying to solve a certain feature, a certain subset, right? They don't holistically, and I try not to use that word because I do hate it, but they don't really solve the underlying problems. And that's why, like I said, to me, before we even start talking about tech, right, you already have some good built-in technology in terms of whatever you're doing. Look at how can we improve this from a people perspective and process perspective and policy perspective, right? It's harder to do. It's much simpler to say, yeah, buy that tool and you'll be fine, right? I cannot tell you how many businesses I've come across. We're like, oh yeah, we're secure because we just bought this $100,000 tool. I remember having a conversation with this company and like, yeah, we just bought this really great tool. We're secure. I was like, that sounds like silver bullet syndrome. Mind if I take a look? And it walked me into their data center. Like, yeah, here's this, this state-of-the-art tool. It's fantastic. It's going to alerts all these threats. At least that's what the sales guy told us. And I was looking at following the cords, and I was like, it's not even plugged in. Like, I was like, are you serious? I was like, yeah, it's not plugged in. I said, like, that's false sense of security, right? Technology isn't the problem, and technology alone won't be the solution. Don't get me wrong, it's important, but we put technology on this goddamn pedestal that it's going to solve everything. It won't. Right? At its root, these are deeply human problems. Scammers have existed since the time of the ancient Egyptians. The only thing that's changed is how it's manifested, right? We need to solve these problems as people, and we need to look at this much more deeply through a risk lens and less so through a technology lens.
I think something I hadn't really thought about, and I don't know why, but COVID being such a catalyst for a lot of risk is really just because people are not in the same rooms. They're probably working off of devices that maybe aren't authorized. And just how people manage their own, the interoperability of their personal lives with their business lives. So I do wonder, you've touched on some things like those processes and different lines of communication, but if you are working with an employee group that are predominantly at home, are there extra things that they should be like, this is foundational, this is something you should be doing no matter what?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I'll drive it back to, again, so if people are working remotely, how are they getting into the network, right? How are they accessing corporate files? And again, if it's through however that remote access is done, that needs to be reevaluated. What happened during the pandemic was that everyone started working remotely. And most organizations, but in particular smaller organizations, were unprepared for that. Larger organizations were fine. They just needed to buy additional licenses. They already had remote access. But the smaller organizations, they scrambled, right? And they set up all these fairly insecure remote access capabilities to facilitate people working from home. They're like, yeah, short-term fix. But guess what? As is human nature, we do those short-term fixes and then we get stuck doing something else and we forget to fix the actual underlying short-term fix. from many small organizations, that short-term fix has now become a systemic risk. And in some cases, I'd say an existential risk that they need to address. It's just, again, we're all going a mile a minute. Are we going to slow down to fix those problems, right? So for anyone that's working remotely, how are they accessing things, right? Is that as secure as possible? Or is it constant with a level of risk that someone at the executive and or board level be like, yeah, that makes sense, right? So that's one thing. The other thing then too is, again, what data are they interacting with? And again, that's why I always go back to some of these points, because these are ultimately the upstream problems. What data are they accessing? If this is data that's supporting mission critical business processes, well, we should already have that figured out, right? They should be accessing it in a way that makes sense. But again, these organizations have not done those mapping exercises.
I'm hoping to bring value to the audience, and something that's coming to mind right now is, I think, as you mentioned, like we think about financial records, we think about employee records, all of those sorts of customer records, but even someone who you've hired to do your social media, right? Your marketing team, folks who might have access to your Twitter account or whatever. I will say that one of the craziest things I saw was that for 2 years straight on Twitter was just accounts getting hacked and taken over by bad actors. And sure, maybe they're looking in at their DMs and trying to find data, but mostly what they're trying to do is impersonate that organization and drive their audience to nefarious, like malicious links, et cetera. And what a reputational risk that was, and financial liability issue. And so to me, I think, to your point, 2FA practices for folks that you might not necessarily be thinking need.
Absolutely. And you bring up a really great example around social media accounts, right? Again, those are things which the capability is there. It's not turned on by default, right? So those are absolutely core ones as well. And again, even if you're a one-person shop, you'll have your company's social media accounts. Those should all be under MFA, right? Yeah. Very simple, cost-effective things to be doing.
You've gotten busier over the last 6 months with, maybe as companies have figured out where they're landing with all this stuff going on in the economy and business world. And I know you've been speaking to organizations and at different events, and I'm wondering if there's any key themes or key questions or new opportunities even that you're hearing as of late that might be interesting that we haven't talked about yet.
I mean, that's a great question, Ashley. I mean, to me, I think the big things that I'm hearing are, one is, again, on the supply chain side of things, right? How do organizations provide some level of reasonable proof around their security practices to the Fortune 1000, Fortune 2000 companies of the world in a way that is cost effective and in a way that is very obvious, right? That's something that a lot of companies are grappling with. Yeah, there's these different, I'll say, security standards, but they're moving targets, and I think that there's opportunity for innovation. So that's an interesting area of development. And we've talked about already, but just diving deeper in it, the whole AI era, right? AI tools are quickly, especially personal AI tools, have quickly become the biggest source of, I'll call it, data leakage in organizations, right? Where people are just saying, oh, I'm just going to copy and paste this and put that in ChatGPT and see if I can make something more optimal out of that. There've been instances where people have copied entire customer data sets and put it in there and say, mine this data and help me find something, right? They have good intent, but that data, that customer data, is now out in public domain, right? That is the biggest, I'll say, security nightmare / risk / opportunity for maturity growth there, in that AI has changed the game tremendously. Most security tools to date don't provide that level of contextual awareness, right? So rolling out AI is great. It's important for innovation. I think it's important for building the strong companies of tomorrow. But unless we do so in a way that is talking around risk and putting in the right guardrails, right, so we're opening up a massive can of worms, right? And then, like I said, I'm seeing that there's a small mortgage brokerage company that I do some work with, and they said, some of our staff, they just copied some data and they put it, customer data, and they put it in their own personal ChatGPT. I said, well, that's not good. Like, that data is gone, right? Like, that's You may want to tell your customers about that. Again, these are questions that need to be had at the ownership level, the executive level, and those questions aren't being had yet. So we can't just be saying we're going to ban it, we're going to block it. That's not going to work. You can't just say to people, "Yeah, just use use our corporate version, don't use your personal one." That too isn't going to work. We need to, like I said, really understand where are these problems going to manifest and what can we do from a governance and risk perspective to say, yes, this is the type of risk that we're willing to accept, we're willing to approve. Anything above that, we need to take steps on, right? So there's not enough conversations happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note, if folks are wanting to ready themselves and be basically prepared to learn more, learn how to ask the right questions, at least as the number one, if they want to reach out to you or dig into some resources that you may offer, let's tell the audience how they can find you and what sort of things you can put in front of them.
Yeah, sure. So two best places to find me are there on LinkedIn. So just look me up, Dominic Vogel. I'm the only English-speaking Dominic Vogel, at least I think. There's a German guy there, but he's not in cyber. And also my website, vogelleadershipcoaching.com. Those are the best spots to find me. On my website, you'll see much more concrete examples in terms of the security services that my fractional aspects provide. And the thing that I want to tell your listeners too is that at the end of the day, when I have a conversation with prospects, I seek to provide value from day one. Even if you don't choose me, I want to give you something that you can take and actually take away. I pride myself on not being Deloitte. I pride myself on not being KPMG. I'm not going to send you a 10K for a 5-minute conversation. I believe in serving the small and mid-sized business community. And at the end of the day, we need to collectively lift the tide here. Right? If we raise the tide here for all the ships, we'll be in better shape at least from the Canadian economy perspective. Right? And right now, the Canadian economy, through that lens of cyber risk, is at great risk because the majority of SMBs are at heightened cyber risk and we're not doing enough to do it. So I'm happy to help. So people can just reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll make sure to put your LinkedIn and your website in the show notes. Dominic, thank you so much for coming today. I think that you have really helped lay a foundation for folks, at the very least, to bring the awareness, because it seems to be that's step one, is to be actively thinking about what you're doing and what you're not doing as an organization. And I do implore people to connect with Dom online, and you'll also probably brighten up your timeline a little. You think cyber is all doom and gloom, but if you're connected with Dom on LinkedIn, you'll also see some bright, nice things that hopefully will brighten your day. So, Dom, thank you so much for joining us on Canada Now. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. If you're listening on audio, please hit subscribe. And I'd love if you'd rate the show if you're enjoying this now that we're kind of on our way to 10 episodes, and tune in on YouTube and subscribe and like and follow. All right, everybody, thanks so much. Have a wonderful day. Take care.